Okay, hello. Welcome, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome back at the Partos Innovatie Festival. We are still having some technical difficulties, but we will just begin regardless of that, and then hope that we can get everyone here, also virtually, to talk with us about shifts in communication. That will be about storytelling, ethical storytelling, changing the imageries and the stories that we tell, changing the production processes that we are working with in producing humanitarian imagery. And I was actually wondering how many of you do actually work in a communications department or a fundraising department in an NGO? That is about 50%. That is excellent. Okay. My name is Wouter Omen. I am here from the Expertise Center in Humanitarian Communication, which is an expertise center that focuses on decolonizing storytelling in and through NGOs in the development sector. And I will host today's session on shifting communication. And I will be joined by three fantastic speakers that Sarah has found in all the parts of the sector. We will be joined later, I hope, online by Mora, who is part of the content studio Lamb Sisterhood, who will also be giving a show later today. We will also be joined by Joost Basmeijer, who is in that corner. Hello. He is a photojournalist who works both for a range of media outlets in the Netherlands and also, I think, National Geographic. Is that correct? Yes, so also internationally, but also for a range of NGOs in the development sector. And he will tell us all about the kinds of different ways of working with both kinds of media outlets. And then we will also be joined, or we are joined, by Sarah Page, who is in the seat at the front. She is working at Spark at the moment, but she is quite an experienced worker in the communication departments of many different NGOs. So what are we going to do today? We are going to discuss ethical storytelling in fundraising and in communicating about humanitarianism and particularly development stories. And these kinds of stories have their roots in the very colonial history that development itself has. And throughout the decades, all kinds of different NGOs, all kinds of different development organizations have been working to come to terms with those colonial roots. But these steps that we have been taking in that respect have been slow and small. So we are still working on that. And I do think that we will keep working on that. And that mainly has to do, I think, and I wonder whether you agree with the fact that when we are practicing and communicating about development aims, when we are working in that sector, we will, in all kinds of different situations, encounter power imbalances between the West and what is called the Global South, which is a contested term in itself. We can discuss that if we want. But those power relations and those power imbalances have for a very long time been, well, in some sense, reflected in humanitarian communications rather than contested. So we should aim to address those power imbalances. We should aim to break those power imbalances down as much as we can. And I do think that we not just have to change the imagery and the representations and the stories that we tell, but we should now also make a shift in the production processes of this imagery. So how do we actually produce images? How do we work with teams in communication and storytelling and the production of media content in the places that we work, rather than just working from our own offices and from our own teams to go elsewhere and make stories and produce images? And how should we actually think about how we can collaborate with local partners, not just in doing the work that we do, but also in producing imagery and telling stories? So we have three speakers today who will present their work and their ideas and their experiences and their knowledge in about 15 minutes per person. Then we have a short question round from the audience. We can keep that very, very short, because at the end, everyone will join us for a Q&A and discussion at the end of all the presentations. And we will start with Joost, who, as I mentioned, is a photojournalist, but not just a photojournalist, but a multimedia journalist, who not just works with photography, but also film and also text. And he will actually enlighten us about exactly those kinds of things, how you can combine those kinds of media to tell a well-rounded story, how we can work with online stories, and he will do that based indeed on experience working with Dutch media outlets just like Trouw, NOS, NRC Handelsblad you mentioned, National Geographic, but also NGOs like Amref Flying Doctors, HIVOS, Just Dig It, I think, World Food Programme. So all kinds of different ways of working with imagery for different kinds of media outlets and partners. Give him a hand. Here's Joost.
Hello allemaal. Can I talk in this microphone? Is this working? I think so, right? So hi, my name is Joost. This is my PowerPoint presentation. Actually, the introduction has been quite good. These are some of my clients. I used to work for Radio 1, which is a Dutch radio broadcaster in the Netherlands. It's a radio channel for current affairs and news, basically. And I was their online coordinator before I moved to Nairobi, Kenya, where I live now. I've been living there for about 4 years. And since then, I've been working for these outlets as a freelancer. So that's why there are so many different kind of organizations that I work for. And Sarah Colmes, she's sitting right there. She asked me to highlight some of the multimedia stories that I did for different media outlets through the years. So I would like to tell a bit more about the stuff that I did. This is a story, for instance, for NRC Handelsblad, a Dutch newspaper. It was about the effects of the coronavirus on the Morans in Samburu, which is a county in Kenya. Here you can see the Morans, by the way, and this is a bit that shows the introduction of how the story looked online. So it was basically just a normal newspaper story with text and photos in the regular newspaper, but for online we made a different version of the story that also included audio and video. And this is how the story basically started. So basically, if you go to the big online story, the first thing you would see is this, which is basically the introduction where the Morans are singing. And then it's also mentioned in the piece itself that they're singing. And the area that you're seeing and the little boma that you can see there is the place where they are living, which is also mentioned in the piece. So actually, this is a sort of introduction into the realm or the sort of story that is told by Koert Lindheijer, the correspondent for NRC Handelsblad. And I think what is interesting about this one is that me coming from a background with radio, I think it's very important to also tell with stories more with audio. So this is basically the introduction in audio with, you hear the goats, they're also mentioned in the story, you can hear the Moran singing, that's mentioned in the story. So basically I would like to say, like, if you're working on multimedia stories, it's very important to start with sound, and from sound also add different layers with video and photography, because I think you can create a lot of extra depth in storytelling if you add visuals, but also audio, because it sort of says something a bit more about, basically about the characters or the. I forgot the word. Sorry, my English is a bit rusty. I've been in the Netherlands too long. But there are a lot of different kind of ways of how you can make sure that you're sort of introducing people, but also locations that are mentioned in the story to the reader or the viewer also in this sense. This is a story that we worked on for the Volkskrant, and you can see there are a lot of different locations. Also, maybe let me go back for a bit. So this is a story that we make for Volkskrant, and you can see that as you scroll down, you can see a lot of different locations that basically are introduced to the reader or the watcher if you scroll down the page. So basically, I think this is still a story that is very. It is a bit similar to the newspaper article, right? Because then you read and you see photos. But by doing it in this way, I think you can make a bit difficult technical story about genetically modified mosquitoes. That's what the story is about. You can make it a bit more sexy and a bit more interesting for a broader audience as well by adding more layers to the story. Why I think that is important, and it's also important for NGOs, is that you're trying to tell a story, right? And you want to share your story with as many people as possible. You want to do it maybe through a brochure or through social media, through, I don't know, a newsletter. So all the old-fashioned kind of ways of telling the stories. And online you have a lot of extra, sort of handles to pull to make the story actually a bit more immersive and a bit more interesting. This is a story that I worked on for El País. It's about climate change. And here also what I try to do is introduce people that are the main characters in the story by video. So also in the newspaper, it just looked like a regular story. Oops, sorry. But here you can see the antagonist. That's the word I was looking for before. And further along in the story, there are 3 more videos introducing basically the main characters or antagonist of the story, which I also think is adding more layers to who those people are, where they are, and also to make a story a bit more humane and a bit more human. Because eventually, also for the development sector, I think you're trying to tell stories that involve humans and should be about humans. And I think with the kind of way of adding multimedia layers, you can actually make sure that you give people a stage to tell their story and also introduce more layers of that person than just your description in text, maybe, or maybe just one photograph, which I think is important. This is a story that we worked on, my partner and I worked on for the VPRO, which is a Dutch broadcaster, and this is an interactive video, so it's a bit more of a scrolly telling. I'm not sure if you're familiar with that word, but it's like an online production that you can watch on your mobile phone or on your iPad or on your computer, and basically you can just scroll through it and then see different aspects of the story. And if you wait a bit longer, this is a bit of the introduction of the story, but if you wait a bit longer, you can also see that there are different elements that you can click on. So basically you can see where the location of this story is on the map. You can click through to other sources, and you can also add longer versions of the interviews that we did. So basically, you can basically say like, okay, this is the red thread that we want you to see if you're scrolling through it. But if you are interested in the location, for instance, or if you're interested a bit more about this person, or you want more quotes or more sort of ideas on what other media or other NGOs wrote about the conflict, in this case between herdsmen and farmers in this area, you can click through and you can actually give a sort of more nuanced, better version of the story than just by using text and video. Like I said, like Wouter said before, I also work for NGOs every once in a while, and this is for the Dutch Relief Alliance. It was also sort of version that they made, so you can also maybe take a look at this if you're looking at how this can work. This kind of way of working can be used for NGOs or for organizations in the development sector. This was a story about the effects of COVID on different people and different communities in Ethiopia. And as you can see, you can scroll right, you can click right, and you can see a little bit of information in the top end of the production. And if you scroll down, if you want to read more, you can scroll down and read more about the people that are being that we interviewed. I didn't do the interviews myself. I did the photos and videos. I was with a Kenyan lady named Anne Kahura. She did all the interviews, and we translated them obviously to the Netherlands because it's the Dutch Relief Alliance. But at least you can see that this is also a version of storytelling which is working better, I think, because you can also add layers of video, audio, more photographs, instead of a normal brochure, old-fashioned brochure that you would hand out, or maybe a newsletter that you would send to your donors. Because eventually, I think the most interesting part about adding multimedia layers to a story is that you can tell the story a bit better. Basically, that's what I was, what I wanted to tell with those short introductions. I'm sure we will have a lot of different and follow-up questions that we can answer also about the way that I work, some cases that I have from the field. In short, this is the presentation. Audio is very important, so don't underestimate it. Video can add extra layers to a story, but also if you combine all of these different elements, you can actually give a more nuanced and I think a fairer image of a location, a story, or a person. And then the last one would be online there's more room to tell human stories. So then you can click through, create more optional possibilities for people to read a bit more about the subject, which I think is very important if you're trying to tell a nuanced story, and sometimes they can be a bit long, but at least make it optional for people to learn more. I made a page on my website, which has all the mentioned stories. So if you want to take a look at it, you can go to this URL, and then you can click on every story to fully watch it and read it. That's it.
Thank you so much, Joost. Please stay with us for a bit longer. I think we have room for one or two questions immediately, and then we will have you back later in this session to have more questions and discussions. Is there anyone who has an immediate question? Yes, Sarah?
It looks beautiful, and interactive video is such an amazing tool that we have now. But like reading times of articles, and I do it myself. I just open my app and I check the headlines, and then I'm like, okay, I know what's going on. So how do you still tell the story that you want to tell when everything has to be so much faster and you have to grab people's attention so much?
I think you really have to look at multimedia productions. They don't work with every story. So I think they only work with the bit broader stories that people actually have time for to take a look at. I think also the DRA project, for instance, that was featured in the presentation, is also something that is sent to all the different stakeholders. Like there are 14 NGOs in the Dutch Relief Alliance. So they also have to sort of see what is happening on the ground, what are the stories, what is gathered, what content is gathered. And also it goes to all the donors. And I think the Dutch Relief Alliance has less donors, but if you're working for an organization that has physical donors that are maybe giving money to your organization every month or every year or so, those people are actually also interested in getting more information, and then I think they can actually sit down and enjoy the information. So for them, this would be interesting, right? Normal news organizations like the New York Times, and they use stories like this as well. I think it's still a developing sort of tool that organizations have. But I can see that the New York Times is now making documentaries. They're making these kinds of things. NRC Handelsblad is making podcasts. So the lines are blurring between all those different sort of contents and media. And what I think is interesting, if you have a clear idea before you go into the field of what you want to gather, you can still have all the old stuff. So you can still have maybe a blog post with one photo and some quotes and a story. But you can also try to combine everything that you gathered in the field and put it in a multimedia story like that. So you have to look at how you're using it and what you want to get out of it. And it doesn't work every time. But I think if you're talking about telling a fair story, telling humane stories, human stories, I think that these kinds of tools can really help out with that. Yeah.
question? Yep.
So do you also go out in the field with the idea that you can use the content in different ways, or is it already explicit that you're like, okay, I need this audio to be?
Well, actually, both. So I already know a lot of the times. I already know that I need to gather certain types of content. I'm not really sure how we'll use it later on. But for instance, in the VPRO story that you can watch, there are some sequences that just have stills, so photos, but then just of a burned wall or something like that. And I would never take that picture normally, but now I knew that I was working on a multimedia story, so I knew that I needed some slides with text in it on a sort of okay background that wasn't too busy and distracting. So basically, I already knew that I was going to make it, so I already knew that what kind of content I needed, and I also, so normally I would film maybe a bit more from the hip, you know, and follow people around, but now I also knew that I needed stabilized video footage, because otherwise you can't read a text with video going all over the place, with audio going all over the place. And also with audio, I think I spent maybe 4 hours in total just standing like this and recording audio, because I knew I wanted to use it later on. And this was a very clear example, but for NSC Handelsblad, for instance, they didn't ask me. They're a bit old-fashioned, right? They do make podcasts, but they're a bit old-fashioned, so they didn't ask me for this video, but I still sort of made it. And I also already knew that I wanted to record some of that audio, because it would be cool to use it in the online version of the story. So, yeah.
All other questions we will keep for later. I had some myself as well, but that is for later. Thank you so much, Joost. We are now continuing with Anne, who actually has found a way, and we have found a way to connect to Anne Mora, who is representing Lamb Sisterhood. Can we see Anne?
Yes.
Yes, hello. Welcome, Anne. Where are you calling from right now?
Hi, everyone. I'm calling from Nairobi right now.
Excellent. That is great. Anne, welcome. You are representing Lamb Sisterhood, which is a content studio who makes stories for African women to be seen, heard, and beloved. Actually, Lamb Studio is founded by 3 African women, 3 African feminist women. I think that is very important to underline, who produced all kinds of award-winning content, all kinds of video, audio stories, text-based stories, but also you're doing things on stage, experience theater, as well. And now, as a collective, you are also based at the Aga Khan University, if I'm correct, as innovators in residence, which is something that I'm very curious about what it actually is. And for them, you are actually producing what you call Brazen Universe, which is about the life stories of African women who actually made the difference, those women who actually we do want their stories to be heard. Also, we might be able to know Lamb, the Lamb Collective, Lamb Sisterhood, through a satirical video that you produced. A satirical video about the racist hiring practices of the New York Times. That has actually been viewed hundreds of thousands times, I have been told. So I think, Anne, the floor is yours, and tell us what you have for us.
Great, thank you so much. So that was a great introduction. And so, like you said, my name is Anne Mora from the Lamb Sisterhood, and we tell stories for African women to feel seen, heard, and beloved, and we both teach, tailor, and tell original stories. So today I'll be focusing on the tailoring end, and this is when we develop original content or advance existing content for clients, and these range from for-profit and non-profit clients, some of whom included like RightsCon and Oxfam, and now Partos, as we'll be performing, or rather there'll be a sharing of a performance we developed at the end of the session. So we're very excited to see that. And what we wanted to talk about today was the lessons we've discovered in co-creating story. How do you co-create a story with the people from the community that you're working with? And we wanted to focus on, instead of picking all these different examples, we wanted to really dive deep into one specific project we were involved in called Nambwa FM. Now, end product is Nambwa FM. It was a film that was nominated for several awards, got a special mention at the Humanitarian Communication Awards, that we were involved in pitching concept as well as writing the screenplay in both Kiswahili and English. And so, the end product is great, but we learned a lot of lessons around how to get to a product that we believed in, at the very least, the point of the screenplay. And especially because in creative products, you always have a huge team involved. There's so many moving parts. It's always important to remember that you can to focus on what it is that you're there to do and to do it as well as you possibly can, because in film, the writing is the kind of baseline starting point. We had like a very heavy task of how do we make sure that this core script and screenplay is reflective and honoring of the community in which these teams are working in. So we're going to start right at the brief. It was to produce a campaign, a short film, on the situation of adolescent girls and young women in Kwale County in relation to gender-based violence and economic exclusion and empowerment. This was a brief from the Girls Advocacy Alliance, and we were contracted by Livestream Limited, who was one of the implementers in Kenya. And so the first lesson we learned was, you have to ask yourself, who are you really there for? The fact is, in any organization, in any brief, in any communication you're trying to do, you're going to have a lot of competing interests. And when you have competing interests, at some points they're going to come into conflict, and you're going to have to make a choice, one way or the other, about what the film is going to be about what your campaign is going to be about what images you're using. And when we were called in, this isn't just a critique for NGO spaces, even we have competing interests. And so you can see this in this slide. The Girls Advocacy Alliance is working for the protection of girls and young women against violence for their economic empowerment. Ostensibly, they're working for girls and women, but they have to be accountable to their donors, the people who are giving them money, the people who are part of the alliance. Livestream Impact, which was our main contractor, is a content studio focused on communication for development. Of course, they want to do high quality development communications, but they have to make sure they meet the needs of the client. If GAAs really wanted a certain message to come across, Livestream Impact has to find a way to make that come through. And us, we're a content studio that tells stories for African women to feel seen, heard, and beloved, but we have to write a screenplay that talks about really heavy, violent subject matter that can be quite damaging to the audience that we care for. So how do we balance those three needs? How do we balance all those different needs? And the fact is, you don't. You kind of have to know what your priorities are. And for us, the priorities are always to tell stories for African women to feel seen, heard, and beloved. African women are who we are going to always be held accountable to. We are ready to disappoint many people, and we have lost opportunities and left contracts because if ultimately the work that was going to be produced was going to be harmful or damaging or not make African women feel seen, heard, and beloved, then it's not going to be work that we would be proud of. And so it's really important for you to ask, who are you really accountable to? You don't even have to say it out loud. Keep it in like your spirit. Who is this really a project for the community that you're working with? Or is this a project so you can sign off tick box something, that a report that you have to file? Is it for is it for your boss? Or is it for a person you met on the street? What exactly and who exactly is the work for? Because that impacts everything else going forward. Because it makes your choices happen. Your choices will reflect your true intentions, not what you say not what you think you're going to do, not what you say on the report, but what actually will come through. So for us, when we received the brief, we knew that we had to talk about violence, but if our true intention was making African women seen, heard, and beloved, we had to come up with a way that rooted that intention before the brief. The brief had to be kind of like the box that the work was going to be in, but it could not be the content of that box. So we wrote it out. If our intention was to make African women feel seen, then the work had to be written with and not for them, which meant that we developed this project with, depending on how you count it, 15 young women who we worked with for about a week in very close proximity developing stories, or 500 members of the community who participated in focus groups where we wrote the questions and went and asked questions directly in the community to figure out what is it that they want to see. If you want them to feel heard, that meant even if you're talking about a difficult subject, it had to be trauma-informed. No one is going to feel heard if they're seeing subject matter that makes them feel re-traumatized. And you also can't let it be patronizing. It's very easy in development to end up having content that makes somebody feel small or makes them feel like they're subjects. How do you make sure that it's trauma-informed and not patronizing? They had to feel beloved. This, in my experience, even having worked privately in the NGO space, is the biggest mistake most nonprofits make. It's not entertaining. The fact is, if it's boring, no one cares. I say this as a person whose job is to try and get people to read and engage in my content. If it is boring, they do not care. You have to have something that they want to see, that is engaging, that they want to connect with. And by entertaining, I don't mean light, I don't mean lacking complexity or rootedness, I just mean interesting. And finally, it has to feel. We wanted them to feel, not think, not perceive, not, communicate, to feel it in their spirit. And this is why we love story. Story makes you feel. When you have a great character going through difficult problems, regardless of where the story is placed, you will engage, you will communicate, you will feel something. And so this character in the image, we designed with the 15 young women. She became Pendo in the film, but we named her at the time Aziza. And they are the ones who told us who she needed to be like. The protagonist needed to be swift, deductive. They gave us her diploma levels. She has a diploma in information. She listens to certain music. She loves food. This was all information that they gave us that helped us have a strong, compelling, and rich character that could be at home in almost any film. You could throw her into any book because she was whole and complex and written with them and trauma-informed and entertaining. Then we got to a great story. Then be ready and excited to be wrong. The fact is, you will be wrong. You will. Not you might be, not it's possible. You will be wrong. It will happen. I say that having been wrong. Even in this film, we thought, okay, we're storytellers, we're crafted, we're trained, I have a master's in creative writing, I know how to do a story. And we assumed that maybe, what we'll be gathering is information and data, and then that's what will shape the story. 100% wrong. When we showed up and we're working with the girls, we put up an activity like, hey, I wonder what kind of space, what's the fictional town the people in this film will live in? And we ended up with a detailed map from where the lake is to the kaya to this is where the timbo is like a mine. This is where the mine would be compared to where the bars are always near the mine. And from that, it was like, so you'll see what will happen is the girl who's kidnapped will be in the mine. And then she'll be taken to the mango, which is the bar area. And then you'll have to follow them from here to here to here. They gave us the story in great detail. Our job stopped being trying to craft something for them or about them and became about trying to capture what they said in a way that was a little bit more professionalized, granted, because we have experience, but they knew what they were trying to say. Even the scenes and the sequences, we have very detailed maps and scene charts of this is how you go from scene 1 to scene 2 to scene 3, how the scene starts and scene ends. But all of this was just a reflection of what they wanted. The story ended up being a young DJ at a local radio station who's very popular, gets a call from a girl who's been kidnapped while on air, and she has to drop everything to try and save her. We're talking about violence, talking about sexual exploitation, but much more interestingly, it's a good story. I want to watch that film on Netflix to date. So the lesson we learned from that, the lesson I learned from that, apologies about that, is that you have to find and trust actual experts. And I use the word actual very deliberately. It's very loaded, especially coming from an African context. The word expert is often gendered, it's often reflective of power dynamics, it's often tied to class. And the fact is, the actual experts are the people who have that lived experience. No one is more of an expert in their own lives than the people who lived it. And you are never the actual expert. And I say that including myself. I might be an expert in my craft, but I am not an expert in their story. And so your job has to be, how do you find and trust actual experts? How do you find and trust people who can speak to that lived experience, who maybe have skill in the thing that you're very good at, but can help you tell it better? And because we knew we weren't experts, we're from urban Nairobi, we're class people speaking urban Nairobi Kiswahili, which is terrible Kiswahili, trying to talk about sexual violence in the coast, deep Kiswahili speakers with native languages that we don't speak. And so we had to go to site thinking, who's an actual expert we can work with? So we had a whole plan. We only had 3 weeks to develop the screenplay. It was a very tight timeline. We did it all that. But as part of the plan, right from the ideation phase, we knew we had to identify someone. And we're very excited to find Patricia Kamende, who's in the image. And she is possibly the most talented natural storyteller I've ever met. And she not only understood how the women, the experiences, the lived experiences of the women and girls in the community, she also understood this is what's compelling to them. Note, not what's compelling in general, what's compelling to the young women and girls in the Kwale community. Because as we said, we are there for African women. Not what's compelling to GAA, not what's compelling to the Lamb Sisterhood, what's compelling to those African women. And so she was with us all night, every night, walking through, we're thinking, oh, maybe the villain will be sitting and serving really nice tea in her really nice house. And she's like, no, it's not tea. If she's wealthy, she'll be serving fresh juice. That's how you know. This is what happens when you look and you listen to and for actual experts with that lived experience and give them the opportunity. And please note, I did not say the training or the capacity building. I said the opportunity and the space to actually inform the work that's going on. Let them be part of the production process. Let them own it from the beginning and take ownership and have decision-making responsibility in the story shape itself. Because of our work, we ended up with a very detailed and powerful outline that eventually became Nambwa FM. And so the last line, which is perhaps the most important line, is that it is not about you. This is a very easy mistake to make. It's a mistake we have made. It's a mistake everybody makes, where you get stuck in the idea of what you want, in the thoughts of, this is what I hope to accomplish. This is what I want to communicate. But actually, if you find that the people on the ground, the people of the community that you're working with say, we don't really care about that, then maybe the problem is your brief. Maybe the problem is your perspective. What happens when you start by assuming that you are more likely to be wrong than they are? What happens when you begin by assuming that you are the one who probably doesn't know? It doesn't mean you might not know. You might find that actually in this case, it is me. But when you begin with the assumption that you are the one who is incorrect, that this is not about you and it is about them, it frees up so many possibilities for storytelling. It frees up so many possibilities for communication, and it recenters who the work is actually about. If it's not about you, you're forced to ask, who is this about actually? So those were my brief lessons in communications and collaborative storytelling. Asanteni just means thank you. So I think I'm open to any questions. You let me know.
Thank you, Anne. That was great. I was actually wondering, how can I look to you? So is that in that direction for the camera? Yes, I get the thumbs up. Thanks a million, Anne, for your talk. Let's switch over immediately to questions. 1 or 2 brief questions, and then we come back to you, and also later in the panel. 1 or 2 questions for Anne. I look to the audience, not all at once.
I think everybody's impressed.
It's actually mentioned that everyone's just impressed, and I think I can second that. I had a question. There is a question. Oh, fantastic.
Okay. Thank you very much for that presentation. It was very inspiring to see. I'm working on a few projects where we're really trying to make sure that there's local ownership of what happens in the project. But one of the things that we really struggle with is it takes a lot of time and you put a lot of pressure on people. So I'm wondering, in this example that you named, like, how do you make sure to include the community themselves, still fitting within your time frame, but also not exploiting them too much or putting too much pressure on them to do this kind of work?
So I think for us, it was recognizing that you're working with experts and approaching them as such. So if you're working with an expert anywhere, you have to have a brief, you have to have timelines, you have to communicate them clearly and well in advance. When we found the live stream team is the one who set up and organized all the focus groups and did a lot of the heavy lifting there, and we're so grateful to have worked with them. And our job when we got to the ground was looking for a storyteller who we could trust and who was going to be an expert in that work. And we subcontracted them and paid them as experts at standard rates, the same rates that we were paying ourselves, from our own money, to make sure that Patricia could work with us for those 2 to 3 weeks. So it is a lot of work. It is a lot of time. It can be very, very challenging. But I think, again, I'll keep going back to who is this actually for? If it is actually for them, then you find a way, honestly. And also you can ask them. Ask them, like, what is this about? How is this too much pressure? How can we shift this? What's a good working environment for you? With the young women we're working with, I think by day 2, they were all having their babies and children in the room. It became almost like a daycare center as we were working, because that's what made it easier for them. So engaging with them as experts and talking to them as equals and treating them and paying them as such makes a huge difference.
Thank you for the answer to that excellent question as well. Other questions? I think what we will do, Anne, is that we let it sink in during our next talk, and then we will definitely get back to you with more questions and more discussion about this, because I think, indeed, as Sarah said, everyone's just like letting this sink in and having this wash over us. So what I will do is introduce our next speaker. Stick with us, Anne, because now I'm inviting to the stage Sarah Page, who is an experienced NGO communications professional who is particularly focusing on the Middle East, if I am correct. She's doing so through the organization of Spark, but before she has worked with Amnesty International Israel, if I'm not mistaken, with Human Rights Watch UK, and she does so holding a bachelor in psychology. And before actually going to work at NGOs, you also worked as a journalist, particularly in film and in documentary for instance, the BBC.
Right.
The floor is yours.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. Anne is a great storyteller. I hope I can follow her. I think I forgot everything that I was going to say when she was speaking. Yeah, well, half of us in the room, I think, are working for international development organizations, so I think you will resonate with this. People in international development are weird. And weird is, maybe you came across it before, it's a Joseph Heinrich is an evolutionary psychologist, and he comes up with this, but I think it fits very well with the international development space. WEIRD stands for Western, Educated, Industrialized, Rich, and Democratic. And yeah, most people in international development are this categorization of people, and if they're not, they're largely working in this type of organization, which obviously in storytelling creates a lot of problems. We've heard a few of them already. But yeah, we bring our own unconscious or conscious biases. We have a bit of a supremacy problem in international development, and that, yeah, it's really, it's something that we're going to address. I'm from the UK, so this was one of the classic examples of when an organisation really gets it wrong. I'm sure you all have similar examples. So Comic Relief is a big kind of televised annual fundraiser, and they often use celebrities to raise money for development projects. And this woman here is, her name is Stacey Dooley. She's kind of a TV presenter in the UK, and she was flown to Uganda for filming, where she then, her Instagram was, she was spamming everyone with her pictures from there. And obviously I blurred the face of this kid, but she didn't, and was hugging children, posting photos without their consent, and well, you can see in the comments, like, yeah, everyone was rightfully upset about this. She's toting her white privilege and things like that. It's very colonial. And I talk a bit later about Comic Relief's reaction to this. I have, a bit my own experiences where I really realized my biases. This was a film we were making with a woman she's a Syrian woman in Turkey, and she's a student of ours, and I was making this film, and I was working with local filmmakers who were sending the footage back to Amsterdam. And I was editing it and snipping away and composing music and stuff. And it got to the day before we planned a whole campaign to go live or whatever. And I just got a text message from her, WhatsApp, and she was just asking. It was completely coincidence. She was asking me how it was going. And I said, yeah, like, we're so happy, thank you. And like, the film looks great. And she was like, can I see it? And I was like, uh-huh. And then I sent her the link, and she immediately called me and was like, Sarah, I'm so sorry that there's a shot in the film that I really feel uncomfortable with. Her skirt had like blown and it was showing her leg, basically. And I thought, oh, shit, I've really not involved this woman in the telling of her own story at all. She finished with a filmmaker who sent me the footage, and then, I created what I thought was her story here in Amsterdam. And this was the first time she's seen it. And of course, I took the shot out, and it was fine. But I also, it really made me realize that not only had I not involved her in the telling of her own story, I'd also made her feel, scared and bad and guilty, and that's really not the job that I should be doing. That was a bit of a moment for me. I think one of the main ways that we show these biases, these weird characteristics, is really through our language. And there's a big conversation at the moment in different areas with the use of words. And so this is one example. The Guardian is, instead of using climate change, they now insist on using climate crisis to kind of emphasize the severity of the problem. One World, maybe you guys saw this one, or actually it was a series of different terms and words. One World says, we're constantly saying in international development, like, we give this person a voice, or we give them a face, and actually people have a voice, they have a space, they don't need your help or assistance to do that. So you should better say something like you give them a platform or you give them a podium, I think this is. Similarly, gender neutral pronouns it's becoming much more an inclusive way to talk about non-binary people, and that's happily becoming a bit more common these days. But yeah, in international development, we have our own series of problematic linguistics. I think I made this sentence up happily, but yeah, in my organization, this type of language is not that uncommon. So you're talking about like, it's militarized language, like boots on the ground, and it's capitalist, and it's dominant. You know, we talk about beneficiaries all the time, and beneficiaries is such implies, you know, that we are dominant over people that we're trying to support. So yeah, I really try to find alternatives. I'm certainly not the person that should find all these alternatives, but I've researched and thought about it a lot. And I mean, beneficiaries, yeah, I just mentioned, but you can better just say participants, or actually we work with young people and students and entrepreneurs. So I just always just refer to them either as their name or as what they are doing. Empower is a great one that comes up all the time. In fact, I think even one of my directors recently told me that he wanted to empower me, and I was like, fuck you, man. Like, I don't need empowering. And it's always, it's often used with in conjunction with women. So yeah, you know, women don't need your power. They have their own. So reinforce or something like this is maybe an alternative. Wouter mentioned earlier, I think, developing countries or the global south. So developing countries, this is also kind of in comparison to developed countries. You know, we're always making these comparisons to the West. And global south, yeah, I'm also not sure if that's the one. There are many countries, I think, that are lumped in with the global south that are actually in the northern hemisphere, and it's also then, it's a comparison. It's othering, and I think Anne mentioned capacity building. Yeah, I really don't have an alternative for that one. So I'm more than willing to hear your suggestions. But it's something that we really struggle with, and I see it all the time. So local creatives. I wanted to talk a bit about the work that we've done with, other people are doing, working with people really from the countries that we're working in. We work a lot in the Middle East. And so the example I gave earlier of comic relief, after this big, you know, savior, white savior, like shaming, basically in the news, they really took a few steps to try and, took a look at themselves and realized that their storytelling was not super ethical. They stopped sending celebrities to Africa now. They also made a commitment with 4 African filmmakers so that they will make their campaign films in the future. And I think they also, along with the BBC, try to make their crew more inclusive and diverse in terms of people. So it's not only like what you see on the screen, but it's also who's making the films, which I think is really important. This is a few shots from a film that we made. We were nominated for the Humanitarian Communications Award by Wouter. That's how I met Wouter. This is a film about an entrepreneur that we worked with. He is from Burundi. He makes these charcoal blocks, basically, that are used a lot for cooking or fuel source or whatever. And he found a way to manufacture them not from wood, but from waste products. So, it's a very innovative business, and Spark is supporting him through business development and that sort of thing. But the film was really nominated, I think, because we worked entirely with a Burundian production team. We kind of gave them a short brief, and they took care of, the interviews. The interviews are all in Kirundi, the local language. They get a lot more context, a lot more, a lot closer feeling, I think, than if I was to go there and try and make this film. So we were proud of that one, and it's certainly something that I can recommend. If anyone's working in Burundi, then go check them out. This is a great friend of mine. Her name is Millicent Bharti. She's from the Solomon Islands, and she is a fantastic graphic designer, an artist actually, and she works now with UN agencies and governments and international development actors, because she uses local oral storytelling practices to translate basically public service information, big, announcements about new industrial sites or whatever. And I think it's a very interesting way, and I, think that we should all be looking for these type of people and creatives and artists and filmmakers or whatever that really understand, local kind of storytelling or languages to really tell the stories better. And here are a few examples of her work. Basically, like how to vote and election campaigns promoting the role of women, and again, an EU campaign preventing violence against children. COVID-19 last year was really, I'm sure it impacted everyone's way of working. You could no longer send film crews, you could no longer make pictures, you could no longer tell really people's stories in those traditional ways that we'd always done it. And user-generated content is not something super new, but it was our first foray into this world. So we asked a series of young people in the Middle East to basically, it was a test, it was an experiment, so we didn't really give them a brief or anything, other than, no swearing and things like that. But we basically dropped them off with the keys to our Instagram account, and we said, okay, we'll see you in a few days. And the results were pretty good. This is a few slides from a girl called Noir. She studied with us and now runs a small business selling soap from Aleppo. She's Syrian and she's based in Lebanon. And she started talking. I was watching, from home thinking, oh God, what is going to happen? But she started talking about her business, of course, which is very smart. We give her the platform. She talks about her own company. Then she started asking other people to share their businesses, and she started sharing them on our platform. So she's doing, success stories for our NGO. Then she started talking, she did a Q&A, so people are asking, how do you get involved with Spark? How do you get a scholarship? And she's, showing people how to, log in and stuff. So she's doing our outreach. Then she starts talking about, thank you to the donors and these people that fund Spark. She's doing donor visibility for us. It was pretty impressive, the amount, we just gave the platform basically, and she was doing our work for us. She also did a couple of surprising, get in shape while you're working from home things, which I don't think we would ever have advised her to, but the results were really good, We had huge spikes in our engagement rates, in our followers, and it really showed us that all you need to do is be the platform. You just need to be. My job should not be trying to craft stories of people. They just need to, have a space to tell their own stories. And that's, we try to do that as much as possible. So we recently had a celebration moment where we reached 10,000 scholarships for Syrian refugees in the Middle East. And it's your lovely queen. And the Queen wanted to get involved. I think she had been involved in the beginning when we started. So rather than making it a spark show and making it a thing that we could have made it all about us, as Anne said. But it's not about us. And in fact, we connected Queen Maxima with a student in Lebanon, student in Iraq, and they were really then able to have a conversation with someone of influence about their needs and what they want to do in the future and how they want to see it and the solutions that they have, which I think is, that should be our position. We should be the broker between those situations. And the same goes, this was a TV interview where we were asked to send a Spark representative. And instead, we sent this woman who's one of our entrepreneurs, Hannah, her name is. She's an entrepreneur in Jordan. She goes on TV, she tells her story, and she gives Spark a little mention. But I think we should be giving the opportunities elsewhere. I'll end just on some guiding principles. They're really hope-based principles. I don't know if, you were talking about those already today. But I find it, very, very helpful when doing any sort of storytelling. Really changing, this 80s style of NGO storytelling with the fly in the eye and the poor kids, and instead, you can tell so many stories of hope. For example, like Spark works with Syrian refugees in the Middle East, and in Turkey especially. And of course, that image conjures up so many stereotypes, whereas Syrian refugees in Turkey have founded 14,000 companies in the last few years, which contributes 500 million to the Turkish economy, not to mention all of the jobs and stuff for Turkish and Syrian people. So you can better talk about hope and about how and about solutions, and rather than saying what you're against, you can say what you are for, which I think is much more compelling. We're really in a time where the world is super polarized, and I think strong stories that unite people really have a lot of power to change things. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sarah, for your talk. Thanks a lot. Let's jump over immediately to one or two questions and then have everyone back at the stage for a more prolonged discussion. Immediate questions for Sarah.
I have a question.
Yes. I will.
Oh.
This is for Anne so that she can actually be with us.
Hello, Anne. Mambo. So how do you select people that you want to give a platform, and how do you make sure that people who are not very maybe good on television or on screen, or like storytellers themselves, but do have an interesting story, how do you give a platform to them?
I think, exactly. We're always making judgments before in the selection process, you're right. I think with the takeover or the social media, that's a lot more of an open space for lots of different type of people that aren't necessarily that into being in a video or being on TV or something like that. So we found with this kind of method of storytelling, that really opened it up for a lot of different types of people. And even people, we have a lot of times since working in the Middle East where, like, especially women do not want to show their face that much or have photos online. But still, like you said earlier, lots of stuff can be done with audio. That's a good place to start, I think.
I was wondering, was it difficult to, in your organization, to sort of give up your control? So, like, be the platform. How did you manage maybe other teams who are not so keen in being that open, let's say.
Yeah, no.
It's a bit scary, maybe.
It is for sure, super scary. I think we're quite lucky. Spark is not like a huge HEVOS, or we're not that big, and so we are able to experiment a lot of the time and just try things. And yeah, I think sometimes taking some risks, especially on social media, everything's so fast. I think it's worth it sometimes to take those risks and just try.
Thanks a lot. What I would like to do now is have everyone on stage or on screen, in the case of Anne. Sarah, I think we have half an hour left. That is correct, right? That is correct. So half an hour left for discussions more generally. I would like to continue with one additional question for Sarah, and then we can see where the discussion takes us and see what kind of themes and ideas pop up. I also had a question about the campaign that you made together with the production team in Burundi. How did you actually find them? And how did you know that they were the production company that you wanted to have and that you needed? Because I think that if you want to switch to people on the ground in those particular places, it can be tough to actually find a partner in that.
Yeah, true. In our case, I'm not sure how it works, maybe in other organizations. We always have a local office. And I think in this case, they had worked already with Akeza, that's the name of the production company. They'd worked with them already before on in an event, making just, an event video. So I think that would be kind of my advice, is to try, if you are not already working with local creatives, is to try first with small things, and then you can really test the water and see, who you want to work with. I think that's how we've managed it over the last few years.
Perfect, thanks. Okay, we are together with the three speakers. Thank you all, three speakers, three very compelling, interesting, and engaging talks, I think. What I will do is just give the floor to the audience and see where it takes us, and then see if we need some direction or some additional ideas to come up. Is there anyone who has a question for any of the three speakers that you've been thinking about and that you want to ask?
Hi, so I love the idea of paying local experts for the contribution that they make, and you talk about curating your space. So instead of producing content, you become a platform. I was wondering, how do you do that? How do you curate your space or your platform? Because complete loss of control is chaos. There's some curating that probably happens. How do you do that in a respectful way and honoring the expertise? Also, in your case, I'm not sure, but did you pay them, for example?
Yeah, no, we didn't pay them. I think, when you talk about, it's about, in NGOs, you always have, so many different stakeholders that you have to please, I guess. So we also have to always keep in mind our donors, what are their agenda, how are we going to represent the local partners that we work with. And so, I think there is a selection process that goes on there. I'm not sure, how ethical that is now in the end, but that's how, we've been doing it. Is choosing people based on, few criteria that fit the bill.
Yes, there's two more questions. I will get to the back first.
Yes, thank you very much. Actually, it's a question to all of you, because on the one hand, you're advocating having local people tell their story. On the other hand, you have Joost there, who is so successful because he is from the Netherlands and he has the Dutch perspective of what is happening there in Africa. So I was also wondering, do you think you can only tell the story with local people, or do you still need some kind of translation so it can be adjusted to an audience in the West? Thank you.
Thanks. Who wants to have the floor first? Maybe Anne, to have her, because she is so in the back on the screen. Let's have Anne first.
I think I think I'll keep going back to the same question I set up in the beginning, like, who is this work actually for? So our work is always going to be for African women. It doesn't mean we don't work with or for people all over the world from different spaces, but because we know who it's for, it means we have to, from a feminist perspective, prioritize those people in the production and in the making. We will always find and choose women over non-binaries and center them. We'll always have to try and find and choose people who are from different class, economic, and rural or urban backgrounds. It's part of our mandate. And so I'm extremely hesitant to say you should or should not work with someone. I do think that the choices you make are part of you saying, this is who we work for and this is who we believe in, and this is where we want this work to exist. So the New York Times article, for example, the job posting, was clearly designed for a Western audience and had a lot of racist overtones that, being from the continent, we could see from a mile away. And when we made the video, it was not intended to go viral. It was meant to be literally for a circle of friends on Twitter. But because we knew who it was for, again, African women, it made a connection that expanded beyond our original expectations. So I can't give you a yes or no answer, like you should or you should not, as opposed to challenge you with the question of who is this work actually for? And I think that should give you the answer of who should do this work at any one point.
Thank you. Joost, the one to answer the question next.
Yeah, well, I think I get a lot of requests for, or a lot of requests. I get requests for certain photography assignments, and every once in a while I have to say no because I'm not the right person to make such an assignment, so to do such an assignment. So if you're talking about a TV reportage or maybe a small bit, like for Amre Flying Doctors, for instance, they had a television show where they needed some reports from the ground. Sorry, I'm not going to use it anymore. Or not the field, but from their local, not local, from the programs in Kenya. I knew that it had to fit in a certain format for Dutch television, for Omroep Max, which is an elderly, where's elderly people. So I sort of knew what it should look like. It shouldn't be too flashy and everything. So I said yes to that one. But then if you want me to make a compelling story from the informal settlements in Nairobi, for instance, I'm not the right person, because if I'm there, I'm the white guy going there. I'll be very visible. I will not be able to tell the real stories as they are, because I'm not from there, and some photographers are from there and can tell those stories way better. So yeah, it's sort of, I would not say that you have to exclude certain makers from doing anything, but I do think you have to think about it very clearly when you give someone an assignment, for who is the best person for this particular assignment. Yeah.
Sarah?
Yeah, when I first started, like 5 years ago, it was within my first 3 months. I was sent with a Dutch filmmaker to Jordan, and we were tasked with making 3 films with some of our students. And of course, I don't speak Arabic, neither did he. He'd in fact never even been in the Middle East. So we tried our hardest to make these films, and I just thought, like, of course, if you've ever tried to edit in a language that you don't speak, it's a nightmare. So yeah, we made these films, and it was just not. That was another one of my my big lessons. Really, that's just not how it should be, and of course that shows in the quality of these films. And now, after 5 years, we grew, and now working in every country where we are, we have a communications person who is from that country, who speaks that language, who knows that community. And yeah, I question myself quite a lot these days about what is my added value now to the team, when it's, we have a great team and they are also capable. And yeah, where is my role? So yeah, it's definitely, I don't have the answers, but I think it's certainly a good question.
Were those three answers the answers that you were hoping for when you asked the question?
Yeah, no, I mean, definitely. I do think. Thank you. No, I mean, definitely. I was also a journalist in East Africa, so I've had some experience in there. But I keep being amazed. Now we're here with so many NGOs that even in 2020, last year, I still saw NGOs sending white photographers from Europe to Africa to take pictures. And I think, how can you be an NGO and claim that you want to help a continent and still send people there? Because in every country in Africa, there are qualified photographers. They're there, Maybe people are just too lazy to look for them, or they don't have enough trust. But I mean, they're there if you do an effort. And I think there's even networks, and organizations specialized in that. So, please stop doing that, Ken. Thank you.
Can I add a little bit more to that? Because so I'm a maker, right? And I'm a Dutch maker who's based in Nairobi. So I'm in a certain database of people who can do certain stuff in Kenya or in Nairobi. And every once in a while, I also get requests from sort of the brokers that are there. Some of the brokers are based in Amsterdam, some of them are in London, some of them are based in Nairobi, and they are the link between organizations like Spark and makers on the ground, or doing it again, trying to get it out of my system, on the ground. So sometimes it can be very hard to find those makers, right? Especially in countries where there's less NGO activity. Like in Kenya, you have a lot of photographers and a lot of filmmakers, so you have plenty to choose from. Where if you go to smaller countries, maybe in West Africa, maybe a bit harder because there's a language barrier as a Dutch NGO professional to find someone who you can work with. The thing that I find very annoying as a maker is that those broker organizations that are in between NGOs and the makers on the ground are that they often ask from the maker. So you're trying to empower a maker to help them. So if you want to go to Malawi and you want a Malawian filmmaker to do your story, and you do it through one of those broker agencies that exist, they actually make the maker sign a waiver that they can't work for the NGO directly for like 2 years. And that's actually quite problematic, right? And I often have to say, like, I'm not going to sign this contract like this, because otherwise that's completely that makes sure that I can't work for that NGO like in the next couple of years, which is quite problematic. I would say that obviously those brokers, they exist with working with those contracts, right? So I think it's also for NGO staff, it's very good to know that those kind of contracts exist, and they can be actually quite harmful or maybe not as empowering for the makers as you want them to be.
We had a question over here.
Yeah. I think the discussion also deviated my question a little bit away, but I have a question, and I'm very interested in the user-generated content, right, or participatory content development. And I was wondering mostly whether Anne, you're also doing sort of a more light way of collecting content, so not these heavy processes where it's really co-creating this story, because that as a professional in the NGO sector, I don't have, unfortunately, I wish I had, don't have the time to go through these processes. So it's more, I think that what Sarah's approach would be is more like, hey, I want some content on this. It would be great if you can tell your story, and because that helps our cause. Sort of that approach more. But then I always, and because I'm also experienced in filmmaking, those type of things, my critical lens towards like the technology side of things always gets in the way, because it's also I want a good story, and I think the story is important. But then if the audio is bad, I know that's going to eventually, well, it's going to cost your story in the end. So how do you balance with those type of things? That will be more a question for you, Sarah. But yeah, let's start with the user-generated content, sort of more light version, and if you do something like that.
Yeah, I really do hear about like time and capacity. We're a very, very small company in the middle of Nairobi trying to even figure out how to like pay ourselves half the time. So I really understand like that balance. We are a story company, so I suspect in terms of the NGO sector, the kind of weight and pressure is different. Our focus is always going to be on storytelling. And what we have found, again, the who we are for and why we're here is our lighter storytellings is newsletters we have a newsletter that we release monthly. That's, we write that in a day that goes out. We do the occasional Twitter, we do some short videos. There's our own content that come from our perspective because we can be the experts in that. Whenever we're developing content that is for other people, we have to be, again, from the African feminist perspective, if I'm going to say this is like a quote from a very kind of Gen Z feminist, which I love them. They're going to burn down the world and I'm here for it. She was like, if you don't have the capacity to do the thing the right way, don't do it. And I remember reading that while I was trying to make a brief for someone and it stopped me because it's like, well, yeah, actually, you don't have the space. Perhaps you're not the right person to do it. And so your question becomes, is there another way to do the same thing that I'm trying to do? Is there a smarter way to do it? Is there a consult I can get from someone who's done something similar? Are there people who I can talk to who have ideas and expertise and pay them accordingly to get us there? So it's not, I don't think it's a yes. I'll keep saying this. I wish I had a better response. It's not a yes or a no or a balance thing. There's always going to be a prioritization. There is always going to be a choice you're making between those two things. You're going to err more on one side or the other. And so you just have to be honest with yourself, regardless of where you're coming from, about which side you're erring towards. And once you made the choice, you have to own it and commit to it and know that you're going to live with whatever the consequences are, whether it means you're not sleeping for weeks, or you don't have any money, or you're not going to live up to your ethics, whatever the case may be. So it's not an easy choice. And like I said, we're a limited company, not a nonprofit. So I know there's a whole different set of things which I think Sarah can speak to more effectively. But I really do think you're going to have to make a choice one way or the other, and you have to be honest with yourself about that.
Sarah?
Yeah, can you remind me of your question?
Well, it was more about
the quality.
So the user-generated content, like where do you draw that line? Like what's the balance? Because what I tend to do with user-generated content is really sort of send guidelines for like a video. If I use a video for social media, I know it has to be short, otherwise it's not going to be effective, right? But then there's also this balance, right? If I'm forcing people to give an answer to a question in 20 seconds, just sort of steer the discussion, what meaningful can they say really, right? So it's really these type of things. But simultaneously, if I don't give these guidelines, I'm going to end up with videos that are 10 minutes long. I can't do anything with it, right? So it's those type of...
or you have to edit it and then it's the same. I mean, every story has some sort of frame, right? That I don't know if you can really ever make like a perfect story that doesn't have, some sort of angle. And I do, our experience with social media and user-generated content has really been surprising because, I'm also from this background where I think about like, okay, did you do the audio and can you sit in a nice lighting? And but yeah, it's actually people have phones and they know how to use them now, and I actually didn't have to explain much of that stuff. And we are forced always to do shorter and shorter and shorter content. But there's still so much that you can squeeze into 15 seconds of Instagram story, I think. So, yeah.
I think online you can also add the longer version maybe somewhere else, right? So what I think is what the DRA did with their online magazine is basically they gave the red thread. I think, in my opinion, they could have done it even more lengthy make it optional and by clicking through, you know, like give the whole interview. If someone wants to read the whole interview, it's there. We did it, right? It's already somewhere. You don't have to shorten it necessarily, but make it optional. I think that's also interesting. So maybe you can use the 20-second version on your account and say, hey, if you want to hear the 20-minute version, it's still somewhere, because online, you know, it's possible, right? There must be some solution.
Can I?
Yes, you-
I always wonder, like, do you get to see much of the results of like long form journalism? Like, do you know how well that does, how much it's read, and?
Not too much, to be honest. Yeah, not too much, to be honest. But if I take a look, this was always a discussion at Radio 1, right? Like, how are you going to make radio visual and add text and infographics? So put a lot of money, basically, and time to make a multimedia production. How are you going to make sure that enough people read it? And I think sometimes not the right stories were picked to be made multimedia stories. So then it's a bit tricky. But it's also like a kip-ei verhaal, a chicken or the egg. Like which one is first, right? If you're not doing it, you can't see if it's working. If you don't experiment, like you are doing with Spark, you will never find out what is working. And if I look at the big media companies out there, like the Washington Post, for instance, they keep on trying to create multimedia stories also on very long form formats for particular stories. So I think there still is a market for it, but you have to really think about it and think it through and maybe really test it as well. Yeah. But it is tricky. It is tricky. Yeah.
I had a question myself, which is mainly directed to Anne and Joost. Maybe start with Anne, because Anne and Joost, you are both independent media makers, storytellers, but you do work with NGOs. And since we are here in the room with quite a few NGO communication staff, I was wondering, what makes your life hard in dealing with people from NGO communication departments? What kind of requests, what kind of briefings makes your life harder, particularly in telling the stories that are ethical, that are open, that are diverse? So that was the question that I had for both of you.
That's a fun question. So, what makes it hard? I think, and this is me as an independent practitioner, I worked at a nonprofit for several years before we set up this company. I think the single most challenging thing has been that people in nonprofits are incredibly passionate about their work. You have powerful messages and important messages that need to be communicated and told, and would really fundamentally like change a lot of things, if not the world, if done right. But the fact is, people are people, and if it's boring, it's boring. and I tell this mantra to myself, even in my own writing, even in my own storytelling that has nothing to do with the nonprofit sector. And what often happens is the messaging takes priority over the storytelling. And the lack of trust in the storytellers in coming up with a way to subtly tell and communicate that message powerfully by prioritizing the story. There's been many occasions when we've been in 4-hour meetings. I've developed 17-page Excel sheets trying to show line by line, this is why this line communicates these 17 messages better than if we just said the message. This is why this one moment of silence communicates these 15 briefs better than if I told them the 15 briefs. So really trusting the expertise of the storytellers and really listening to the people on the ground when they tell you, I know you think this might be what you need to tell us, but actually everybody knows that part. This is what people don't know. This is what people want to discover. Like really understanding that people are just people. And if it's boring or if they tune out, then the work is gone. Allow the story to be a story. Allow the story to lead, and know that the message can come through and will come through better when the story is good. that's my number one. That's the biggest thing that we always fight with. It's much harder to have those. I rarely have that level of fight with commercial clients, actually, because they're much more interested in does it communicate well? If the answer is yes, they're ready to go. With NGOs, there's a little bit more need to control, understandably, and a little bit more need and desire to control the exact message, as opposed to trying to see what can come through the story underneath more effectively. Yeah, we could go on, but it's a short seminar.
Perfect. Joost?
I think it's sort of, there's always a big difference between the reality in the office in Amsterdam or Leiden or The Hague and when you're out photographing in, for instance, Kenya. So consent forms and the need to have consent forms for everything, even though you're in a situation where you can really ask yourself if a consent form really is the way to go to get consent, right? If you're talking about power struggles and about a program that you're visiting for a certain NGO in a certain location, there is already some power structure in place. And so, you know, does someone really give consent, or are they really free to give their consent? Is one of those things. The other one is, and it's also a bit more linked to my presentation, is a lot of times I get the question, can you do photography? And then later on they also like, oh, can you also do some video? Because we also need some video. So, well, yeah, I can also do some video, but then like now I have two cameras, right? A video camera and a photo camera. But before I used to have one camera and it has basically have two buttons. One is of taking a picture and the other one is taking a video, right? So I can only capture one certain moment, either in photo or in video. So I really have to explain it like this, very simple Jip and Janneke taal, to really convince people like you can't do both. You're either going to miss the moment in photo or in the picture or in video. And at the same time, so, okay, I can do both, but then make sure that I am there for 2 days instead of 1 day, because it'll take longer to get the real stories, right? To really get to the core of what the story is. And a lot of the times that time is there, sometimes that time is not there. And I think it also sometimes says something about the idea that people have of, like, everybody has a phone, right? Everybody is a photographer, everybody can take a photo. It's not that simple. And it's sometimes it's the lack of the idea of what the actual output will be. So like what I said before is very nice, but you have to think about this before you send someone to a certain location to shoot the footage, to gather the content. Otherwise, it will be very hard for the maker to do so. Yeah.
Thanks a million. I think that we are somewhat running out of time. We have 4 minutes left, so we do have room for one extra question if the question's short and the supposed answer is also short. Yes, that is perfect.
Yeah, actually, about the consent you mentioned, what would you advise? And is it always, I mean, consent is important, I would say. So how do you deal with that?
I would say that most of the times when you're somewhere, there are communication professionals who already know the people that I will interview, right? Who I will talk to. So there is already some groundwork that is done before. And a lot of the times, consent is something that is fixed at the very end. So all the pictures have been made, taken, all the photo footage has been shot. So you also have to sign this form, and then you get this form with English. Sometimes they are translated to local languages, which is already a big step, I would say. But still, I think Wouter and we discussed it when we were walking up here. I once had the situation where you had a Maasai man who couldn't read or write, so then the consent form was already in his language, so that was easy, but then it was still legal. It was sort of legal talk, you know, like the way a consent form is written is not easy to understand. And then he didn't have an autograph, so they took his fingerprint and then made him put his fingerprint on the paper, which is also ethically a bit tricky if you are collecting biometric data from someone. So that's also not the way to go. But then sometimes it can be really hard. I don't really have the question. I think you have to look at every single situation and then see if you can do better in make people understand that a picture can actually end up on a tram in Amsterdam or at Schiphol on all those different posters and collection things. You know, like really trying to make them understand what could happen with that picture or that video, even though it's sometimes very far from their realities or their lives. Yeah.
Thanks. So I think our time has run out now. Thanks a million to the speakers of today, which are Anne, Sarah, and Joost. Give them a big hand. And what I would like to stress is that I take one point from this session which I really liked is the fact that we are now not just talking about what pictures look like and what stories are being told, but also by whom they are being told and how the production process itself can be more inclusive, can be more diverse, can be more bottom-up. And I think that is one of the next steps to be taken after having struggled with debates about representation that will keep, being important forever. But if we want to address those questions, we should also address the question of who is actually telling the story, by which means. So I think that is an important next step to take. And we've tried to do that in those, 7 quarters of an hour, to be precise. And I think we can move on now. Thanks a million again to all of the participants and the speakers. And see you later. Oh, and tune in for... Yeah.
Sorry, I take 1 minute still. I'm Sarah from Partos. I'm working at the communication team together with Freek and another colleague. And I just wanted to invite you to continue this debate and these discussions together. And I'm really happy if you could reach out to me if you have an idea for one session coming up the next couple of months. Then please, join us, reach out to me, and then we can organize something together. I want to thank Wouter also. I think you really facilitated this greatly. And thank you for being online present here. That was really good to hear you. So for now, there are drinks if you want at the second floor. And there's still a program online which is in the Grote Zaal. And if you want to stay for example, to meet the nominees of the Innovation Award, you can go to the Grote Zaal and experience that. Afterwards, there's also more drinks, so you can choose if you want to continue. Okay, thank you. Hoe die uitgaat.